the simple solution was to just shave it off. Because
Yeah.
what I was really looking for, I just wanted to get rid of my anxiety. That was what I was dealing with, was just tons of anxiety about losing my hair, just so concerned about like what other people thought of me.
Yeah.
And that was why it was so liberating when I finally shaved it off, because
Yeah.
the anxiety went away. And I also kind of got to the point where I was like, I don't care what anyone thinks anymore.
Yeah.
uh, it was really kind of amazing.
Welcome, Bald Brothers, to the podcast. So today we're going to be interviewing Blake here, kind of going through his journey and kind of how he came to be the prolific YouTuber, podcaster. Yeah, so I guess when did you first um, realize that you were losing your hair, and then,
Hmm.
you know, did it like affect you immediately, or was
Yeah.
it kind of something that kind of built up?
Yeah. So it probably first began, it may have actually began when I was still in college and
Mm,
I didn't realize it because I had long, longer hair at the time, like pretty like shaggy hair. I kind of did that all throughout college for the most part. And so I didn't necessarily notice that my hair was receding, but when I would like kind of pull my hair back, I could definitely see, some receding at the temples. But I think at the time I just thought I had kind of like a big forehead,
hmm.
which was kind of why I kept it longer anyway, just to like kind of keep that covered up. But then when I graduated and was looking for a job and stuff like that, I realized I probably needed to have a more professional haircut, or at least cut my hair a little bit shorter. I just felt like having the shaggy hair didn't really work in like a professional environment for whatever reason. So I ended up getting my hair cut kind of short, and that's when I first noticed that I thought that it was receding,
Hmm.
because it was really apparent that like my temples were receding, and I could definitely see some like thinning at the
Yeah.
front. I wouldn't say that I immediately panicked. Again, at that time, I kind of just thought I had a big forehead, and so I was more self conscious about that. Um,
Sure.
and and so I was kind of uncomfortable with like a shorter haircut. Eventually, kind of got used to that. Um, and then I ended up finding a job. Kind of moved cities,
Hmm.
and I was living on my own for a little while, which was great. But that's when I really started to notice that like my hairline was rapidly receding, and it was getting really thin, and it seemed like it was happening very, very fast. So I kind of went into full blown panic mode at that time. I remember just like looking in the mirror in the morning, kind of like
Hmm.
getting ready for my day, and just looking at my hairline and just going like, "What is happening? Like this shouldn't be happening yet." um, my dad, he's bald now, but he didn't lose his hair until he was in his 40s, and before then he had really like thick hair,
Okay.
for his whole life. And so I figured if I was going to lose my hair, it would be on the same trajectory or timeline that he did.
Hmm.
Um, However, I did kind of learn later on that my grandfather, on my dad's side, he started losing his hair at the same time I did, and it was like just as fast. So he was losing his hair in his early 20s. So I guess I got more of his genetics.
And how old were you at the time?
Yeah. So at this time, I was 22, or so, when I was really kind of in this stage where I was like, I need to start taking some action, and that's when I started buying Rogaine. Um, so the year at this point was like 2013, and obviously you could do research online, but I feel like there wasn't as much information out there as there is today. You would see lots of advertisements for Rogaine.
Yeah.
There'd be companies like Bosley, I remember, which I never really looked into much into them.
Yeah, me
Um,
neither for some reason. I don't know
yeah,
why.
they were advertised all over the place. It felt like, but
Yeah.
it
Would you
just
know
didn't.
what? Do you know what the treatment was for that, or what were they selling?
That's a great question. I feel like was it hair systems or hair transplants or something like that? I
I
honestly
don't.
can't remember.
Yeah, Mandela
um,
effects.
for whatever reason, I didn't get like a good positive vibe from from that
Yeah.
company, so I never really looked into them.
Yeah.
But I did try Rogaine, and it was like the spray on like foaming kind, and I did that for a while, but I never really liked doing that because it felt like it made my hair like greasier, and like it just seemed like it
Yeah.
would like make it wet and like look more thin than it already was.
Yeah, that was like why I stayed away from it. So
Yeah, I know
yeah,
it kind of was like counter to what I wanted it to
yeah.
do. And
School days were the worst.
what's that?
School days were the worst.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. um, yeah. So but I did try it for a while, and it just, like I said, I never really felt like it was keeping my hair. I never felt like, so in the end, it just seemed like it was hurting more than it was helping because it would just make my hair
Sure.
look like thin and like kind of greasy, and I didn't like that. Um,
Yeah. How long did
so
you stick with it?
go ahead.
Yeah, how long did you stick with it?
I probably stuck with that with the Rogaine. I probably stuck with that for 9 months or so.
Okay, actually, you gave it a good shot.
I gave it a good shot, and I just wasn't seeing the. If anything, I just felt like my hair was getting thinner and thinner.
Sure.
So I don't know if it just wasn't working well for me, or if maybe I wasn't being as consistent as I thought I was with it. Either
Sure.
way, I kept on seeing more and more hair like falling out. I remember just like brushing my hand like through my hair, and it would just have like, like
Yeah.
hair just like coming out all the time.
Hmm.
Um, and then, I kind of, I did go like slip in and out of like a denial phase,
Yeah.
where I just didn't like want to accept it. And if I could like get my hair just at the right length and like comb it in just the right way, I could kind of convince myself that it wasn't thinning. But then I would get like reminded every time I'd see myself in a picture, um, because when you're looking at in the mirror, you kind of stand like at the right angle, and you kind of do exactly what how you want your
Yeah.
hair to be exactly. And for whatever reason, you can kind of make some mental gymnastics to
Yeah.
convince yourself it's not happening. Um, and then there's a couple of photos from like friends' weddings. I had a couple of friends that got married, pretty much right shortly after college, and so those photos, were kind of the first signs or first step where I would like look back at those and be like, oh wow,
Mhm.
um, those are really thin, and I can share some of those photos as well. But
Yeah.
that's when it really started to become something I couldn't deny anymore. Because I would be like, wow, this is an angle I don't normally see
Yeah, sure.
myself at, like from behind or from the side. And it just started getting to the point where I said, okay, it's real. I can't deny it anymore. We've talked about the stages of grief,
Yeah,
losing your hair, and I definitely went through all five stages for sure.
sure.
There's definitely that denial stage early on, and then yeah, the bargaining of just like, yeah, if it could just hang on, like if I could just keep my hair for a little bit longer. And that's when I started to do some research on hair transplants.
Mhm.
I had really was tying a lot of my like self confidence to my hair at that point,
Sure.
which was in hindsight not the correct thing that I was tagging my self confidence to.
What what do you
I've
think makes it
had
so easy to like attach your self-confidence to your hair?
mhm.
Like what makes it easy to do that?
It's that's a really good question. I think it's for a lot of us, it's like it could be a defining feature for you.
Mhm.
It could be you're characterizing it as like youth, and losing your hair maybe feels like you're getting older. You may tie some of your like attractiveness to your hair, or having hair or
Yeah.
not having hair. And
What
so I
was it
think
for
it's
you?
the combination of those things, is what kind of ties you to confidence. I've thought about this a lot, and like you look at movie stars today, like the lead
Hmm.
actor in almost any movie
Yeah.
outside of like an action,
Every one
um,
of them.
Yeah, they all have full, thick heads of hair.
Especially the romance ones. I
Yeah,
think that's the,
exactly.
the kicker.
Yep. And of course, when you're young and you're single and you're like still looking for somebody, it's hard not to look at movies like those and be like, oh well, all of the lead actors have this feature in common, and that's something that I'm losing. So I
Mhm.
think that really does hurt the confidence.
Have a role model that you originally glommed onto that you're like, actually, being bald's kind of cool.
um there's somebody that came up, not initially, but somebody who I really like that I look to as a role model, is actually Sean Evans. I don't know if you know him. He hosts the show called Hot Ones.
Oh,
It's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So he interviews celebrities, and they eat
Yeah,
progressively hotter and hotter wings,
yeah.
while they're kind of doing like an interview. And the reason I like Sean Evans as like a bald role model is because everyone always talks about like The Rock, Jason Statham, but those guys are like the epitome of like the action, hyper masculine, movie star. Sean
Yeah.
Evans feels like more of a regular guy, like
Mhm.
definitely a guy you could have a conversation with. He's not like, he's in shape, but he's not like overly muscular or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, and he just kind of fit my vibe more than somebody like The Rock. Like other than the fact that we're both bald, I don't know how much I I have in common with The Rock, versus someone like Sean Evans, who's seemed a little more easygoing, like a conversationalist, and that was somebody I could relate to a lot more. Um, but early on, I don't know if I necessarily had any role models that I was looking to, because I wanted to not be the bald guy. Like I didn't want to have a role model because it was like I'm not going to be bald. I don't think I'm going to be bald. Um, and again, part of that was that denial stage. Yeah.
Did you have someone that you looked up to with hair that you specifically chose because they had hair?
um, Probably this might sound a little weird, but Jason Bateman, who is probably an
Yeah.
actor most people are familiar with, um, he was somebody that I identified with a lot because of the show Arrested Development,
Oh,
um,
sure.
and his style of humor was just like, it just clicks with me very well, like that kind of like dry, subtle humor, kind
Sure.
of like under the radar. He's sort of like the straight man in that show, but has like so many just like funny lines in that show. Um, and he is somebody who has lots of hair, like he has a
Yeah,
full head
yeah.
of hair.
Yeah,
Um,
even older, he still's
yeah,
kept
yeah, even today, yeah.
yeah.
um, so again, looking at like TV shows and movies and things like that, that was somebody who I kind of just connected with in terms of like humor and like just for that show. And again, he was like full head of hair, and
Yeah.
and actually it's funny because his two brothers in the show are both like losing their hair, but they're
Oh,
more like, so the one brother is like the goofball magician, you know, and
that'd be me.
doesn't really have anything going on other than that. And then Buster, the younger brother, is like very socially unaware, and so they have like some other like not so good qualities. So I didn't necessarily identify with them on that level. Although those are the two
Yeah.
guys that were losing their hair. So
Yeah,
um,
sure.
yeah, so I kind of associated that like, oh, the two brothers who are losing their hair have like all of these more like negative qualities in that
Human
show.
qualities.
Human qualities, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
So going back to like the treatments, did
mhm,
I know you said you were doing a hair transplant?
mhm,
Like, what kind of made you take the leap, and kind of were some like the details that you didn't
yeah,
realize you were going to face? Yeah.
yeah. So I forget exactly how I came across what a hair transplant even was. I must have been googling around and looking for you know hair regrowth treatment, but in the end, I stumbled across. I was living in Chicago at the time, and I stumbled across a local surgeon, and
Mhm.
that was basically all they did, was hair transplants. So I ended up getting in touch with them. I talked to like their um, it wasn't the surgeon initially. I talked to like their, I guess he was like their sales guy or consultant,
Yeah.
and I talked to him quite a few times actually because I was really, unsure about this type of treatment. And he gave me like 3 or 4 guys that I could contact who had gone through the hair transplant um, process. So I think I talked to all 4, if not 3 out of the 4. And they all seem to have had positive experiences.
Hmm.
But I asked them about like, what's the whole process like? You know, what happens? Basically, they told me, well, yeah, you go in, it takes about I think, what was it now? 6 hours, maybe
Oh,
longer.
okay. I thought it would take longer for you.
Yeah, it's a full day thing for sure.
Sure.
But and then they kind of told me a little bit about the recovery period. But it's funny because I don't think I took them very seriously on like how like the recovery side of things. Um,
What do you
because
mean?
I remember when I finally went through with it, the recovery like there was like a ton of swelling, there's like a ton of scabbing. It's pretty like it's pretty, gnarly in the beginning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's and I was really like under the weather for a few days afterwards.
Hmm.
Like, they give you obviously pain medication and things like that. But I was like maybe it's just bad timing, but I felt like I was like quite sick. I was pretty under the weather for a few days after.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I don't think that that's everybody's experience. But basically the process is so at the time I had the option to do an FUT procedure or an FUE procedure.
Mhm.
And for those who don't know, FUT was more common back then. I don't think it's used as much today because keep in mind this was 10-ish years ago.
Sure.
But that's where they literally take a strip of skin from the back of your head, and then they take those hair follicles from that strip and then move them to the front or wherever you need hair. And the reason they suggested that was because they could get a lot more grafts in one sitting than they
Mhm.
can with the FUE procedure, which in that procedure they're just taking individual follicles from the back of your head, and so it
Mhm.
covers more of an area, but they can't get as many grafts as in one sitting. The big upside to that, though, is that there's no scarring or minimal scarring, at least less noticeable scarring, versus the FUT, which is the one I did. I now have this linear scar on the back of my head
Yeah.
um, that is a result of that. But at the time, I was like, well, I just want my hair back, and I want as much of it as possible.
Sure.
And so I was like, FUT, yep, I want more hair, so let's
Yeah.
go with that.
Did it
Um,
work? So, like having the hair transplanted, did you actually have hair?
It did. I mean, yeah, for some time and actually you can still kind of see, I don't know if it comes through here, but like most of the hair that they moved is up here at the front. And so you
Right.
can kind of see where it's my hairline is kind of defined there now.
Mm.
Um but yeah, it is kind of funny. In the beginning they'll like draw with a blue marker or some marker like and they'll draw out where the hairline is going to be.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
you're sitting there in like a chair with like blue lines on your on your head.
Wow. Where do you get to decide where your hairline is? Like, what happens if I wanted to be like, all the way down here?
I'm sure you could ask them to do whatever you want, but they have they kind of study your face and determine what they think would be the best suggested, like where
Mm.
your hairline should be created, and that could have to do with how much hair you have currently,
I
um,
see.
or just your face shape, or they try to make it look as natural as possible. And
Yeah.
so you can again kind of see they were giving me like a definitely a more mature hairline, right? It was still going to
Mm.
have like receding at the temples. It wasn't just going to be like a straight line
Sure.
across. because that wouldn't look natural, and obviously they wouldn't be able to get that much hair anyway, even if I wanted it. Um,
Right.
so yeah, but they definitely suggest what they think will look best
Hmm.
for your situation and for your head shape. Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
then
So,
mhm,
like, you clearly shaved your head. So, like, how long did you keep having hair, and then when did you decide,
yeah,
no, no more?
yeah. So after the procedure, it takes like 6 or 9 months to start regrowing your hair because it falls out at first, then it comes back, and so yeah, I did have a full head of hair back for some time. They do want you to get on finasteride. Um,
Sure.
basically, they said if you want to keep what you have to get on finasteride. So I took that for a very short amount of time, and I ended up stopping it fairly quickly because I was actually really nervous about the side effects. Um,
What were you reading about the side effects, and which ones scared you?
Well, specifically the impotent side
Mm,
effect was the one that concerned me the most. Um, the the consultant had told me that if I ever experienced those side effects, to just stop taking it and
mhm,
everything would return to normal. But I had read a few horror stories online
mhm.
from guys who said, nope, it was a permanent, did permanent damage. Um,
Yeah.
and that really did concern me. So
Mhm. Sure.
just out of pure fear of that, I stopped taking it pretty quickly. Which I've had a lot of people tell me, there was no point in getting the hair transplant if you weren't going to stick with finasteride
Mhm.
because as I did, continued to lose my hair um,
Right.
in the back, especially.
I see.
Most of this hair all stayed
Uh-huh.
because this is not affected by the DHT um, as much. And so I continued to lose all the hair, at the crown, and it started creeping up towards the front. And so, again, for a few years, I was good. I could kind of work with it. I personally felt like the hair transplant place I went to, they could have done a better job because I did feel like the hair in the front did kind of look like plugs a little bit. And I
Sure.
really didn't like that. I didn't like that not natural look. I really wanted it to be like subtle um, and unnoticeable.
Right.
But yeah, so I'd say for 6 years though, I was able to kind of like keep my hair. I had like relatively full head of hair, except for I was losing it in the back.
Mhm.
So probably in the 2 years that leading up to when I shaved my head, I started wearing a lot of hats
Oh, I see.
to cover up the back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically,
Did
anytime I wasn't working, anytime I was out in public, I was wearing a hat. Um,
did you not look into like the finasteride side effects before? Or did you not know that you needed to take finasteride if you were going to do a hair transplant?
yeah, it's all a little blurry now since it was so long ago, but I felt like I was a little bit. I was not given all the information I should have been given
Sure.
before I got the hair transplant because it was really after I got it that
Hmm.
the consultant guy that I'd been working with the whole time, he was like, "Okay, you really need to get on finasteride now." And
Yeah.
I didn't remember him talking about it being like a necessary thing ahead of
Right.
time. So, um, yeah, had I known that, or maybe I was just ignoring it and I was like, oh, it'll be fine. If
Yeah.
I need to, I'll get another hair transplant.
Yeah.
At that point, I was just in
Sure.
that pure desperation stage. Like, I need
Yeah.
my hair back. Um, of course, now, it's so funny now looking back on it because it's like the simple solution was to just shave it off. Because
Yeah.
what I was really looking for was I just wanted to get rid of my anxiety.
Hmm.
Um, that was what I was dealing with was just tons of anxiety about losing my hair. Even when I had the hair transplant and had my hair back, I was still worried about how it looked. I was worried if
Sure.
people like could tell that I get a hair transplant. I was just so concerned about like what other people thought of me. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know why that was. It was just something that I've always struggled with. Um, and that was why it was so liberating when I finally shaved it off because
Yeah.
the anxiety went away. And I also kind of got to the point where I was like, I don't care what anyone thinks anymore.
Yeah.
uh, it was really kind of amazing. It's like,
Walk
yeah,
me through like the first time you shaved your head.
sure, yeah. So I'd been thinking about it for a while. Obviously,
Hmm.
I was getting married in a few months, and I was going back and forth between, like, do I want to have hair for wedding photos,
Yeah.
or if I know I'm going to shave my head, do I want to do it now so that, looking back on those photos, it'll be like, oh yeah, that's how I've always looked.
Yeah.
um, so I was kind of on the fence between the two, and I finally got to the point. I said, you know what, I really just want to be done with this. I'm done with the anxiety that my hair has been giving me for years and years. So I asked a friend to come over and help me, because he kind of knew I was struggling with it, and so he came over and my wife watched as I think I put a chair in the bathtub
Oh yeah.
and sat in the bathtub, and so he buzzed me down, um, and I just remember like looking in the mirror the first time and just being like, wow, like, um, I definitely felt like I looked quite a bit different at first, but I
Hmm.
just felt like so much better, like almost immediately.
Yeah.
Um, and and I had like a celebratory bottle of gin that I had gotten. Like, I'm gonna like make a
Mhm.
thing out of this, and
Yeah.
so I think I had like a gin and tonic, and we kind of
Nice.
like celebrated, and
Yeah.
yeah, took a photo, and yeah, so it was good. And then it was still like there was definitely an adjustment period. It took a
Hmm.
couple months to like get used to seeing myself in the mirror. Um, but really, the thing that kind of surprised me most was walking outside for the first time and feeling like
Hmm.
how cold it was on my head.
Oh yeah. Did you ever get the Velcro head?
Yeah, with the beanies. Yeah.
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 And the pillowcase.
Yeah, just yeah, sticks as you're pulling it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, yeah, but I'd say that the initial reactions from everybody were pretty much all positive.
Hmm.
Couple people like who I think I really like surprised them the first time I saw them. They were like, "Oh wow!" Like, and it didn't seem like, okay, are you happy with this or are you not?
Hmm.
um, but after like a quick adjustment period, most people have
How
been like, "Yeah,
long?
it looks great." So,
Yeah. How long was it before you uh, started to like the look?
hmm, yeah, I'd say probably after a couple weeks, I started. I guess there was a period of time where it was like just an adjustment,
Hmm.
because you're so used to seeing yourself with hair, and
Yeah.
that first time seeing yourself without hair is definitely an adjustment, and so you're not sure if you like it or not. um,
Hmm.
and I'd say after that adjustment period, I just started liking it more and more, um,
Right.
getting to the point now where I'm like, I can't even imagine life with hair anymore.
Yeah.
um,
Same.
and so and I feel like this looks how I look now is just so much better than how I ever looked when I had hair.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
even after the hair transplant, I had hair back. Um, that just yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case for every guy who shaves their head, but that definitely was the
I
case
mean,
for
I
me.
definitely relate. Like,
Yeah.
I look back at my pictures with hair, I'm like, was I clinging onto that? That looks terrible. I think this looks so much better.
Yeah, I think about that a lot because there's that tough stage between having hair and having no hair, the
Hmm.
balding stage,
Yeah.
where obviously at the beginning it's not too bad. It could just look like a mature hairline. Your temples are receding a little bit or it's a little bit thinner, but it doesn't look bad by any means. And
Sure.
then it gets to a point where it's like little stringy or it's very thin or it looks
Sure.
like you're doing a cover up. And so there is a crossover point where it starts to
Hmm.
not look good anymore.
Yeah.
And if you're somebody who's going through it, it's really hard to know where that point is because you may be in a denial stage, you may be in a bargaining stage, and sometimes we just see ourselves differently than others. And like I said,
Yeah.
when you're looking in the mirror, and you kind of try to set your hair the right way, you may not
Hmm.
realize it's gotten as thin as it has. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
What would have been a good litmus test for you to know when to shave it?
Hmm. Yeah. I think I would guess that most guys who have at least started to notice their hair is thinning have probably had that like conversation in their head about, well, is it time to shave my head or
Mhm.
like take some action? I think if you're at the point where you're thinking about, okay, is this bad enough to shave my head?
Mhm.
Then you're probably ready.
Yeah.
Or at
Yeah.
least you're ready to start cutting it shorter just
Mhm.
to see. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it is tough because it's one of those things where, even your friends and family, they're not
Mhm.
necessarily going to tell you like, "Hey, your hair is getting really thin."
Yeah.
It's a sensitive topic for
Sure.
a lot of people. So
Yeah.
yeah. But if
Can
you have
you
like some really honest friends or family members that you can just be like, "Hey, I've been thinking about this. Like, I know my hair is getting thin. Been considering these different options. What do you think?"
mhm.
Because it really does help to have somebody who can kind of give you some outside perspective on on how it looks and what steps you should take next.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can you walk through the point where, like, what was the turning point for you, like, where you're like, I gotta just shave it now. Like, you know, you
Yeah.
tried it, like, one of the most drastic and invasive
Hmm.
treatments for hair loss.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when was the turning point?
Um. Yeah. I don't know if there was one specific moment, just because it had been a 10-year journey for me at that point,
Sure.
and I'd gone through all the emotions around losing my hair.
Hmm.
And I think where it started to get to that turning point though was I was like, man, I did the hair transplant and I'm like still losing my hair. I'm literally wearing hats every day, even though I did this like $10,000 procedure to
Hmm.
get my hair back, and I'm still covering up my hair with hats every day.
Yeah, sure.
And so I was like, I had this kind of choice between, well, if I want to keep my hair, then I definitely have to get a second hair transplant. I mean, the amount of hair loss I still had in the back was significant.
Hmm.
And there were, so that was basically option A. And option B was, well, I could try shaving my head. And I decided that I just didn't want to do the hair transplant again. Um, the cost was prohibitive, and I wasn't even sure if I'd be fully happy with it because I'd done it once and
Yeah,
I still had anxiety.
yeah,
um, so I decided that, well, that leaves me with option B, and I'm just going to shave it off. And if I had been able to go back in time and convince myself at 22
yeah,
um, that was the better option. I mean, just thinking about the 10 years of anxiety that would have saved me
yeah,
is
sure.
is kind of my only, regret in this whole thing. But
Do
I'm
you
glad
feel
I
like
got to the point now where I was able to accept it. And honestly, I mean, that's why, I started doing, making videos as well. It's because
Mhm.
I struggled with it for so long. And I said,
Yeah,
if I struggled with it this much, there's got to be other guys that have too.
sure.
um, and it's really hard to accept it.
Yeah, I mean, it took me around like a little over a decade to
Yeah,
get to the same point too.
yeah, yeah.
Um, what do you think was like the opportunity cost? You mentioned that 10 years.
Mhm.
Was that Could you kind of quantitatively figure out what an
Yeah,
opportunity cost would have been?
it's hard to say, but I think it's big, because I don't know about you, but I spent so much time just thinking about my hair. It's like so stupid now in hindsight. Like, why
Yeah.
was I spending so much time obsessing about my hair? But
Yeah.
it was really like all consuming
It
for a
was.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so just all of that time obsessing and being anxious and being like, if I could just have all that back, it's hard to say what I'd be able to, what I would have been able to do with that time, or not having that anxiety hanging on me. Like, what else would I have done? um,
Mhm.
it's hard to say, but I can definitely tell you that I spent a ton of mental energy
Yeah.
on my hair, and I don't think that that's healthy for anybody. And maybe that's another test for anybody who might be listening, is if you feel like you're obsessing about your hair loss, like if it's
Yeah.
consuming your thoughts on a day-to-day basis, even like hour-to-hour basis, um,
Mhm.
then it's really time to consider the option of shaving your head, because I can tell you that all of that anxiety just went away once my hair was gone. So yeah.
Um, do you regret going through all the treatments, or do you think that's just part of the journey?
I guess I would have to say that there is some regret there now. Part of it is, financial regret, because at the time that was basically my life savings.
Sure.
Is what I spent on this like aesthetic procedure.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and part of it too is just man, I really wish I was just more confident in myself back then, to that
Mhm.
point where like I didn't have to tie my confidence to my hair,
Yeah.
because now I know that that literally doesn't matter at all. Um,
Yeah.
and part of it was I was concerned about, well, will I find a relationship? Will any women find me attractive
Mhm.
with no hair? And I've seen so much evidence that yeah, while some women may have that preference of like, yeah, I want a guy who has hair. Um, for many, it's not really a factor at all.
Sure.
It's, and I've seen evidence. I look at a lot, watch a lot of videos of guys who are, they'll post like, oh, I'm losing my hair, or, I'm
Mhm.
freaking out about it, and so many of the comments in the comment section, from women are like, "Oh no, I love it. I love a bald guy. Like, looks
Yeah.
so
Sure.
good. Like, there's something about it." So like, yeah, again, it's not going to be the right look for everybody, but there's, you know, it's not like you're trying to be attractive to everybody on the
Yeah.
planet, right? You're just,
You aren't even with hair, so
yeah. And
yeah.
honestly, that person that likes you without hair means that you know, they like that feature about you, but they also just like who you are as a person.
Yeah.
I think when you're younger, it's a little harder to have that kind of level of thinking, because you're kind of locked into like looks a little bit more at
Sure.
that point, I think. Um, and it's funny to even say that, because I don't think that having no hair necessarily makes you even look bad.
Yeah.
It's just this perceived notion that like, oh, if I have no hair, I'm going to be less attractive.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's a mental game as much as anything, I think.
Did you ever have that feeling that you were gonna have a weird shaped head?
um, I didn't think about that too much, other than just the overall like having no hair. Will that look
Ah.
strange? I
Mhm.
wasn't really necessarily thinking about my head shape per se, but it's funny you say that, because I do hear that a lot from guys who are like thinking about shaving their head, but that's always the excuse, is like,
Yeah.
"Ah, I have a weird shaped head though."
Yeah.
Um, I feel like 90% of the time that's not the case. Like,
Yeah.
those guys will then be like, ah, okay, I'm gonna shave my head, and then you're like, that looks great. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I get it. When you're thinking about it, but you're nervous about it, you're like, I don't know how my head shape will look, and that kind of becomes your default like excuse for not taking the leap. It kind of gives you that reason to not do it, just because you might be scared. which is
Hmm.
totally understandable. It is scary to do it.
Did you ever have anyone who reacted negatively to you shaving your head?
It honestly, nothing is jumping out other than I think I mentioned like one or two people. Maybe they kind of looked at me, and it wasn't like they gave me like a, oh, that looks terrible. It was
Hmm.
just they didn't give me an initial like positive comment.
Sure.
So while most people were like, oh wow, looks great, um, it might have been like, oh, that looks different. More
Yeah.
of like a neutral,
Sure.
neutral or maybe a little bit negative comment. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's just, again, you just look so much different the first time you
Hmm.
show up to somebody who's used to seeing you with hair, and then you show up with no hair, and there's just an
Yeah.
adjustment period. But for most people, I mean, it's like takes them a day or less, and
Yeah.
then you adjust very quickly to it. Yeah.
How is maintenance for you,
Hmm.
maintaining the shaved look?
That's the best part. I mean, it's so simple. So
Yeah.
I ended up buying. I actually, my wife was shaving my head in the beginning for like the first
Hmm.
6 months or maybe a year. And
Yeah.
I just had like, honestly, it was kind of a cheap razor, and she would just buzz me down every couple of days.
Hmm.
But then I was like, well, there's got to be a better solution. So I started doing some research, and I found a skull shaver, which just kind
Oh
of
yeah.
um, contours to your head,
Hmm.
and it works great. You just charge it up and turn it on, and basically it takes me like 5 minutes to kind of run it over my head. It pulls all the hair into it, so it doesn't like leave a mess,
Sure.
in the sink. And then you just pop off the top, dump the hair when you're done,
Hmm.
rinse it out, and I do that probably every 2 or 3 days. So this is probably like 2 days of no shaving right now. So
Hmm.
you can kind of see the shadow, coming
Yeah.
in, which I don't mind too much.
Yeah. It's
I know
weird.
some
You
people
don't.
they want to keep it like close shaven every day. I'm okay letting it go for a couple days, but that's just me personally. Um,
Yeah.
do you-
Were you ever worried about the look of the shadow before you shaved your head?
there's so many things that I didn't think about in that moment, that probably came up later, and that was probably one of them.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that the shadow was kind of there the first time I did shave it down, because we again used that same kind of cheap razor, so it wasn't
Yeah.
like a full shave. Um, so the shadow was there, and again, seeing it the first time and seeing it now, like I don't mind it too much. Do you
Hmm.
do you prefer to have it totally clean
I
shaven?
I used to really care like when I first started shaving my head, and
Hmm.
then now that I've gotten used to it, it's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
If the shadow's there or not, I kind of go a whole week before I do anything.
Oh, you do? You
So
go full week? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Two more questions.
Yeah.
What was the stage of grief that you got stuck in the longest?
Mm. Had to have been denial. I was in
Yeah.
denial for such a long time. Um, that it was really hard for me to accept that at like age 20, 21, 22,
Hmm.
23, that this was happening.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would just look at my friend group, coworkers my age, and I started becoming like hypersensitive to hair loss, and so I would notice it in other guys,
Mhm.
um, but I would start to like see these trends where I was like, well, it's only like older guys, like guys in their 30s or 40s that I'm seeing this.
Mhm.
I'd look at all
Yeah.
my friends, and I'd be like, man, they have like just thick heads of hair. Like
Yeah.
like how is their hair so thick? It's not fair.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was kind of waffling between this, like, I know it's happening, but I don't want to accept that it's happening.
Sure.
So it was very much denial for like several years. And that I think is probably the hardest stage to get through, because as we kind of talked about before, the balding stages, in the beginning, it's not very noticeable. It gets to some point
Yeah.
where it is noticeable. And it's really hard to pinpoint an exact moment where it crosses from noticeable to, okay, it's starting to not look so good anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
and so you can kind of live in that denial stage of like, it looks okay. It looks okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's not really happening. Or maybe it's stopping or yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say
What would
denial
you,
was the longest one. Yeah.
and last question. So
Hmm.
what would you say to your like younger self if you could? Like a piece of advice.
Just shave it off.
Yeah.
No, I wish I could talk to my younger self about like where my true anxiety was coming from,
Mhm.
because I think I believed so heavily that it was all tied to my hair at that point. But when I've thought about it, in hindsight, I've always struggled with self confidence, especially when I was younger.
Yeah.
Um, I grew up like I was a late bloomer, so I was really short growing up. I was like 5 feet tall through most of high
Mhm.
school, and so I had a lot of like self confidence issues around like my outward appearance, my
Sure.
physical appearance. And then when my hair loss started happening, it all just became zeroed in, focused on that. Um, like the other anxieties were still there, but they were more like dull, like behind the scenes. And
Yeah.
so because the hair kind of became the focal point, I just assumed that all of my self confidence and anxiety issues were tied to that. And that's kind
Sure.
of what led me to get the hair transplant. I'm like, well, if I can get this thing fixed, then I'll be confident and have no anxiety anymore.
Mhm.
But in reality, that wasn't the core root of what I needed to address. So if I could have that conversation more with my younger self about, this isn't where you need to focus. This isn't what you need to work on. That might have changed things. But of course, we always learn and mature as we get older, and that can be part of the journey. But hopefully,
Yeah.
by sharing this experience, maybe for a guy who is in my shoes at 20 20 years old or somewhere near there, hopefully that helps to recognize, yeah, maybe they're in the same boat. Maybe hair isn't as important as you think it is. So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Blake, for
Yeah.
sharing your story. And
Well,
for
thank
all you
you.
other bald brothers or potential bald brothers or non-bald brothers, we accept all brothers.
Yeah.
Make sure you like, comment, subscribe if you like this content. And if any of you are interested in, being interviewed, sharing your own story, whether you're going through it, know people who go through it, we'd love to hear about other people's takes on things. So
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
and yeah, we'll catch you all on the next one.